This week, I'd like to talk about learning to love the writing. Now, you might think that surely because I talk about my writing every week on this channel that I like the writing. Honestly, there are times when I really don't like the writing, and even though it's not like if I want to be a professional author, it's not my job to enjoy the writing. I don't get paid based on how much I like it. I get paid for doing it. But even so, that's still like a like way off pipe dream that I haven't even started thinking about yet. But the thing is, whether or not I should and whether or not it's helpful, there are times when I regularly actually literally despair over the writing. And I know that sounds melodramatic, and I know that in terms of almost everybody else on earth, writers have it easy. You know, I can set my own working hours. I can do it from home in my pajamas. I do, like physically, it's one of the least intense things to do. But this this week was a particularly bad week for me. There was one day when I I thought I had finished my current chapter, and I started making notes for my second chapter, and I kept prevaricating, and I spent a whole day prevaricating, and I ended up writing nothing, and I felt kind of bad about that because much as I try not to let it, my word count every day does influence how satisfied I feel with myself, and that does mean that sort of my emotional state can at times be directly tied to how much I've written in a day. So I didn't feel very good about myself that day. And then the next day, I was able to convince myself to do it, and I started that second chapter. I say started. I opened the page, and I stared at it, and I stared at it, and I had a broad idea of what I was thinking of writing, because I thought, okay, this is when I introduce the second main character. I said a few weeks ago that I was considering doing multiple points of view, where we switch between the two main characters' points of view, and how that could open me up to a different kind of writing style for my second character. Um, I think the problem is I'm trying to lift weights that are too heavy this early on. I need to get up to that level, and I'm not there yet. And I struggled so much to actually bring myself to even look at it that I just reached this sort of breaking point where I thought, if I ever do finish this book, I'm not writing another one. I'm getting out of the game, and I'm finding something else to do, because it's not writing that I'm good at. I don't want to do this anymore. This is just too hard. I want to find something easier. And I stayed in that space for quite a while, actually, thinking, man, I just can't do this. What I'm asking myself to do is something that I don't think I'm capable of doing creatively. And I do sometimes wonder how these videos come across, because it's me just sitting here complaining about how little I'm enjoying my writing, even though the ability to just stay at home and write a book is something that most people would dream of. And I have jumped into it quite foolishly, actually, because I'm not really making any money at the moment. And I try to just ignore that, because who knows, maybe like the universe will randomly present me with something. Because if you can just be sort of randomly hit with bad luck out of the blue, you can also get the same with good luck. That's my thing. You never know what's going to wash up on the shore tomorrow, to quote Tom Hanks in Castaway. What on earth was I talking about? So that's how I feel about these videos. But I think if you are a writer and if you've ever tried to do something like this, you'll probably relate to it. If you really care about what you're writing and how it's going, you'll be able to relate to this. And I bring this up because what ended up happening in the end was I just sort of reached a point where I got sort of so low in terms of not like my mental health, but just in terms of my own creative energy and how I was feeling about this book, that I couldn't go any lower. And I accepted, I know I want to write this book. I know that I do. I know that I do. Because otherwise I wouldn't have been working on it for so many years. You know, most people think they can write a book and they actually can't. They try it out and maybe they last 2 weeks and they just drop off. I would not have come this far if I genuinely were not actually driven to do it that much. And I thought, okay, I know I want to do this. Right now I don't feel that way. Why is that? And I went over, because what I like to do is I like to bullet point what I'm writing next. So that way I don't have to remember things. I can just sort of bullet point them all and tell myself this is what is going to happen next in the story. And I looked at what I had planned and I thought, hang on a second, I'm making it much more complicated than it needs to be. I've got these 2 subplots and I only really need one. You know, like, have you ever read a book where they're like, in sort of the first third of the book, there were like 2 different subplots weaving together, but both of them lead to the same thing happening, and if you removed one of those subplots, the same thing would happen. And you think, I feel like the writer didn't really couldn't see this story properly. Like, they overcomplicated it a lot. They had multiple ideas about how to do this, so they just went with both. And I looked at that and I thought, that's it. I've got these 2 subplots and I only need the one of them. And the thing is, I had planned for how they were going to connect to each other. It wasn't just I was doing 2 completely different things. I had thought, okay, so that one leads to this thing, so that then when we have this other thing, they can coalesce. And I realised, hang on now, if you've got that there, why can that not just do the work on its own? That is simple. This thing you've got planned is simple enough that it can quite easily do what you need all of this to do on its own without that other stuff there. And as soon as I realised that, I had a breakthrough and I thought, that's it. Yes, that's what I've been trying to tell myself all this time. You know what? Actually, okay, right. This is a really weird analogy for me to use, but I'm going to use it because obviously it's me and I am going to talk about Doctor Who whenever I can. Okay, so there is a Doctor Who serial called The Edge of Destruction. Right? And The Edge of Destruction, it's set entirely inside the TARDIS. And the mystery is that something weird is going on. Like, the doors are opening on their own and then closing. The scanner screen is showing them images of their previous adventures. And the food machine in the TARDIS is registering as being empty, but it's not. Things are acting... There's a lot of strange things going on. And so the Doctor explains, if the TARDIS can think, it would have to think like a bank of computers. It would have to think like a computer does, and it can only communicate with what it has. And that, the reason I bring this up is because that's kind of how my brain works, right? I mean, this is probably true of most people, but this is the way that I've understood it in my life. When you're a writer, this kind of thing is a way of sort of your own process trying to tell you something, but it can only work with what it has. And what it has is you and the unique way that you think, your brain. The most unique thing there is, one's own brain. Your writing process only has that to work with, so it has to talk to you using that. and hope that you will eventually understand it. The frustration I felt was me knowing I shouldn't proceed. It wasn't I don't want to proceed with this. It's that I didn't realize this, but I knew I shouldn't proceed because I knew something fundamental wasn't working that I had written down, and that actually there was something much easier I could do if only I realized, so that I didn't end up writing what I had got planned, just forcing myself to push through it, and then realizing, oh wait, hang on, no, it's much easier to just have this one subplot, and that can do both the work. You know, it's like slag off other writers, but there's a certain film I'm thinking about that came out about 13 or so years ago, where there was like way too many things happening in the first act. I'm like, how many of these things actually became relevant later on? Like, that's the opposite of a Chekhov's gun. I'm not entirely sure what that is. There might be a term for that. I don't know. Where the writer themselves doesn't intend for it to not be used. They just don't realise that they're not actually using it later on. But they just put a load of things in there. And, you know, there's often a story can leave you with a lot of brushwood on the floor. And you have to clean up the brushwood to make more space for the great trees. I'm kind of rambling now. My point is, once I got that, I thought, okay, now I have a way forward. I got a little bit lost, and I had to recalibrate, re-navigate, but I've got it now. The thing is, though, a lot of what I had written in my previous chapter was specifically setting up this second subplot that I realised I didn't need. So I then had to go over that and sort of take out those scenes. And it's a bit like surgery, you know. You got to go in there, you got to take it out, and then you got to join the spaces left very delicately so that it still looks organic. And that was about 3 whole pages actually, and I think it was about 1,600 words that I took out. And I haven't deleted them. I have a file where I keep all the stuff I've omitted. But that means that actually my total word count has now gone down. It's actually gone down to about 6,000. But that's fine, because those 6,000 words are now working much better than the 7,000 I had before. And also, I realised the main character's dilemma is not actually set up by this first chapter. So what's the point? I thought, ooh, okay. I had a plan for this first chapter where it lasted a bit longer than it actually does, and there was a scene on the end, and that's where we get this main character's dilemma. But then I got to a point in the chapter where I realised, actually, I've done a lot of exposition, and it's probably well structured exposition, and it's done quite simply enough. But now we've got to a point where it sort of comes full circle with the chapter at its beginning, and I thought that's a really good place to end. Actually, we've gone all the way around, and so I thought, great, tie it up there. That also means, though, that we don't actually get the main character's dilemma set up, and the whole book is about that. The entire book, the whole point of this story is this character has this dilemma. How do they resolve it? What happens? And in the first chapter, I don't actually reveal that dilemma. So the reader is going to be thinking, well, what's the book actually about, though? You know, it's kind of like the first episode of a TV show. It should tell you what the show is about, instead of it just being a day in that character's life, and then the second episode is where you say what it's about. No, that first chapter has to basically tell you everything. This is the character, this is the world they live in, this is the dilemma they have. How could that affect them as someone who lives in this world doing the thing that they do? That's the problem I had. And I thought, okay, that's another reason that I didn't want to proceed with this writing, because I knew there was a big glaring hole in the first chapter. So these two problems ended up sort of cancelling each other out, because now it means that I've got that stuff that I took out because it sets up that subplot I don't need anymore. Now I have this space in the chapter, and I can take the scene I had planned to write for chapter 1 but didn't, and I can put it in that space, which is what I ended up doing. And I still haven't quite finished editing the chapter, but now I actually have a sense of momentum, because what I learned from this experience was that my own frustration was sort of my own acknowledgement, without knowing it, that it wasn't a good idea to write more because there were too many problems with what I had already got, in a way. See, because of my information processing disorder, sometimes I can like struggle to understand what I'm telling myself. And believe me, not actually being able to understand what I'm telling myself is the biggest challenge that I face in my life on a daily basis, doing practically anything at all. So there's that. But that's what I've ended up doing. And now I think, okay, good. When I'm feeling this way, it's not because I don't want to do it. It's because I do want to do it and I want it to be good, and I just have to listen to myself. So when I come up against this wall, it's not because this path hasn't taken me anywhere. It's because I'm not on the right route. You know, there is a way through. There's this wall. That means I need to find another way around. It doesn't mean I just give up and keep banging my head against the wall all the time. So that's what I'm doing. And hopefully now, because of this, I might be able to actually feel less stressed out when the writing isn't exactly working. Hopefully now I can sort of learn how my own internal editor actually communicates with me. That is a huge skill to have as a writer, learning how your own internal editor communicates with you. Once you get that, then I assume the process becomes much more bearable. So that's what I'm going to try and do over this next week. Listen to my own internal editor instead of just taking any doubt as a sign I should give in. They have something to say. I just have to really focus and listen to them. It's almost like mysticism. I'm sure if Alan Moore were here, he could give you a 15-minute lecture on what a muse is and where the word muse comes from. And like many things, it comes from Northampton. The Alan Moore look is kind of what I'm going for. I'm probably not going to in the end. Anyway, so that's what I'm doing. And if I can just hold my nerve, eventually I can see this through to the end. This is a strangely upbeat note for me to end on this week.